Are we back to this again? Testing. Okay, I think my microphone's working now, hopefully. From the top. Dun, 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 dun. This is True Powers Mind. This is TPIM. I started live today's date, December 23rd, 2019, the year of our Lord. Everybody. As we're wrapping up this year, I want to say thank you to obviously all the guests that have appeared on the show, all the listeners, all the commenters, everyone who has shared the show on their social media. It has helped the show grow immensely. Just thank you all. This has been a incredible year of growth, and hopefully one in perspection. But anyhow, that being said, let's get on with it, shall we? I want to start off here with Baby Yoda and the Skywalker saga. Just as I've told you in the past, 9-10 months, that Hollywood has basically ran out of ideals. I brought you Sophia Stewart, who told you this as well. That's why you see all this laughter crap slapped together and this served to people. The empire is collapsing. And I'm not talking about the empire of Star Wars. But as the empire collapsed, they need you to be distracted. You cannot be focused now on what you're going to soon have to realize. So keep on. Sister Love, peace and power. Welcome to the show. You can keep on going. And Half Q, welcome to the show. Peace and power. With the distractions and the blink ring, guys and gals. Keep on being fanatic about these artistic representation of reality and so-called historical events or pure fantasy. But sooner or later, you're going to have to reckon with the reality of the state of world we're in right now and the reality of why we're in this present state with all the history, all the knowledge, with all the people who have empathy and love and peace in their heart, pitted against all the people who have nothing but jealousy, greed, and hate in their heart. Whether we're fighting over the bones of game that we killed in the campfire, or we're assassinating each other's on the streets, a wall for stocks options and treasury bonds. It's still the same principalities in which we commonly wrestle with. And this goes outside of your political ideology or your religious indoctrination or even a non-religious system at all that you operate with. This goes back to just being human. Because we ally ourselves with one another in very complex ways, the doorway quite literally is open for the king to appear. The earth will have a kingdom. And the king will rule the earth. And you don't have to validate that. You don't have to believe that. You can reject it, absolutely. But you still will be subject to it at the end of the day. It's because of our lack of being able to politically reason with one another and come to some sort of accord. That's why we find ourselves in this situation. Those of us who have been dispossessed, disinherited, disenfranchised, we know this cold and cruel reality all too well. But those of you who have been privileged enough to live the dream, will soon realize what I say is true. Now, this is bullshit. I was just thinking about I need to go on a vacation before the end of the year and look at the ads that are popping up for me. All right. You think this is a game, you think it's a joke, but this right here is what I'm talking about. The algorithms are so complex. I fear now all you have to do is think a thing and it comes your way. Like Dr. Neely Fuller Jr. has said time and time again, no matter whether you realize it or not, you're always going to get help where you're going. You're always going to get help where you're going, but you're only going to get it in the way you're going. A lot of people don't understand the help that humanity's getting right now is only going to oblivion and the shrinking down of the human population for more manageable numbers. They already put in your ideal and in your consciousness that it's only through scarcity does one have true value or true meaning. Because there's this perception that there's this overabundance of human life on this planet, which is causing the planet to basically go into global warming or climate changing, thus gives the justification for genocide. It gives a justification for annihilation. And all it takes is for an intelligent man or woman with proper tools and resources and motivation, justification to carry out the most horrendous of deeds against fellow human beings. Now, let me jump over to the chat room. It's the end of the world as we know it, and rightfully so. And the reason why I say rightfully so, because when you have something so wicked, and it is quite wicked, where there is no such thing as sanctity of life, there's only what's in it for me. And that's where we're at. Let me try to scoot this over so we can see some of these headlines. Evangelicals crucified Christianity today over, oh my God. Now, for those who actually compared the impeachment process of President Trump to crucifixion of Christ, I want to break it down to the uninitiated. If you're not anything, a religious group, whether it's a cult, a covenant, whatever organization, when you're dealing with people of faith, anything that threatens the faith is an enemy of that individual. So when you come to town with your little bags of tricks, you have better recognize that the religious zealots of today are not playing around. Many of them are in a heightened state of fear. They're in a heightened state of anxiety, and they're willing to pull the trigger or stab you or poison you or smash your head or whatever they got to do. That's what they're going to do. Now, there are some, I guess, optimistic people out there who believe that if you reason with these individuals, you try to educate these people, that in some way that will change or modify their behavior. But you guys do not understand. You do not understand. There is no for a true believer, there is no reasoning. There is no need to change. Change for what? If I die, I go to heaven because I adhere to the tenets of the of the group or the organization or the law or the word. It doesn't matter what the person is believing. When they cross that line from just a novelist or maybe a student wanting to seek greater understanding to this is absolute, nothing else exists, that's when you got fanaticism. That's when you have the justification in a person who is already properly motivated, and we can almost assume they have access to tools and resources to carry out behavior. This is what the system is scared of. Brother Marty, peace and power. Welcome to the show. This is why the system has to keep us at each other's throats so that our energies are constantly focused on other victims of the system instead of the administrators of said system. And you can break this down whether you're talking about corporate America, where you're talking about just out there in the streets in general, out in the backwoods, it's all the same gag. As long as I can keep you focused on your brother or sisters and their activities, you will not be concerned with my activities, even though my activities controls all of your behaviors. It's just that simple. And the reason why you'll get, hold on, Eddie Murphy hosts SNL. This famous picture. Now, I'm kind of mad that they don't have the image with the Whataburger guy, because there was like 3 of them. Or no, they show the picture of the 4, but there's really more because this dude's in there too. Dude right there. In fact, I should just play that little skit. But I don't want to because I don't want to upset the censors. Now, I'm using these images here for commentary purposes. Now, when we look at Eddie Murphy, I remember Eddie when he first came out. Not like in his early years, but I'm talking about when he did join SNL and a few underground shows before that. His brand of comedy was so over the top. It was so revolutionary for its time. Now, once again, you got to understand, is it really truly a case of these jokes being, philosophically, undeniably rich, or was it really a case of a society that was actually repressed, and because of the greater empire losing its overall strength, the repression it had on the citizen was loosening its grip, and by representation of this fact, you can get people like Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy, those political guys, Dick Gregory's of the world, those political guys that brought us political issues in a very comedic way. I would suggest that the empire was not in retraction mode, they would never have been able to come out because the empire would have crushed them. Now, when we jump gears real quick, hold on. Oh my gosh, this is supposed to be fast internet, yeah, but once again, you can see how slow this thing is going. The reason why I try to bring stuff that you basically don't see or whatever is because hold on. Because I like to be like in a time zone, time warp. I want to share this with you. Now Normally don't. I got this cheesy commercial here.
The backsliding. What accounts for that going on under the leadership of the first African American president? Why? How do we explain that?
Yeah, I think there are a few things, and trying to juxtapose how in the era of the first black president, the bottom fell out for black America. That's going to be a hard juxtaposition to make. I hope to be around to read what their account is for why they think that happened. But my research in this text, a few things in no particular order. Number one, there was too much deference to the president by black people. We got so caught up in the symbolism that we didn't press hard enough on the substance. And so symbolism does matter. I just think substance matters as well. And so there was too much deference in some part to the president on the part of black people. Black leaders were sidelined and silenced too often in favor of an invitation to the White House. And so more could have been done in terms of pressing an agenda. You look at the gay and lesbian community, look at the environmental movement. Of course, Wall Street gets everything they want, but look at what other communities gained over the last decade, and look how black America wasn't just stagnant, but indeed lost ground over the last 10 years, in part one, because we were too deferential. Number two, clearly there was indifference. There's no doubt about the fact that this president received the kind of headwind that no president has ever received. There was clearly obstructionism, so that's a factor as well. But the third factor, I think, I would put as a question. I think, again, historians would debate this for years to come. Did Barack Obama not get enough done on black issues because he was obstructed, or did he not try hard enough? Did he not do enough? And I think the answer is clearly both. We'll see whether historians come down on that. But this book, again, is not about him per se. It's about where black America is 10 years after that text. And again, it's just not a happy report. There are pockets of progress, but across the board, we've regressed.
Tavis, I want to ask you about the president. I know you said the book's not about him, but think of him not as the president, but as someone who cares passionately about the same issues you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Do you think when he reads your book, I'm assuming he will, that he'll agree with your conclusions, or do you think he'll take issue with them and see his legacy in a different way?
Well, that's a good question, Mark. I think, number one, it's hard to argue with the data. This is not a book that I wrote and espouse my particular point of view. There'll be plenty of books written about whether Barack Obama measured up or didn't measure up where black issues were concerned. I just saw a book come across my desk the other day. I think it's The Black Presidency by Michael Eric Dyson is out in Black History Month in February. That's the first of many. I might even write one myself. Who knows about what he did or didn't do vis-a-vis black issues. But this book, again, is about the issues. And so I think when he reads it, to answer your question, Mark, if he wants to argue with the data, then so be it. But this book is data-based. Indiana University, the School of Public and Environmental Affairs, the academics there, the professors there who are trained in these disciplines wrote the book. They wrote the research, did the research rather, and wrote these 10 updated chapter segments on where we are 10 years later. So you can argue with me, but I'm not the guy who pulled the data. You can argue with the data, and I think you're not going to be very successful at that.
Give me your sense of whether the Black Lives Matter movement matters. Is that going to be an Occupy Wall Street that kind of flares up and then disappears, leaving no real trace? Or is that, you think, going to be something that could be significant in the short, medium, and long term?
One of the issues that we can make progress on in this election year and beyond, in a bipartisan way, I might add, is criminal justice reform. As you both know, you study these issues as much as I do. In Washington, there is already talk and there's communication. There's bipartisan consensus already on some meaningful criminal justice reforms, which I look forward to. And I think that can happen if we demand that all voters in this election season. That's something that we can see a bipartisan progress on. To your question specifically about Black Lives Matter, they deserve great credit. They deserve great credit for the agenda that they have raised, for the issues they put on that agenda. And I think that movements are very rare. I'm always careful to declare something a movement. It starts with, how might I put this, a moment. A moment builds momentum, and out of momentum, you can get a movement. But movements are very, very rare in our society. But it starts with momentum, and then movement. They've made a significant impact on the conversation in this country. Whether or not it's a sustainable movement, we shall see. But I am so heartened by these young people who understand that after living lives for however long they've been living, so many young people here, but this generation has been politically marginalized. They've been economically exploited. They've been socially manipulated.
How long will the next global conflict last? The term World War III has been thrown around since as early as 1941, only 2 years into the outbreak of World War II. Since then, the globe has seen war after war and the creation of ever deadlier technologies. Arguably, the closest we've actually come to a third world war was during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 and the War Scare of 1983. But with regional tensions constantly escalating, it's not surprising to see the phrase World War III cropping up more often on social media and in the tabloids. Are you a fiend for facts? Are you constantly curious? Then why not subscribe to Unveiled for more clips like this one and ring the bell for more fascinating content? The belief that humanity is nearing its doom is far from an uncommon one. First, let's look at the phrase World War. Do we mean a conflict in which much of the world is at war, or a war that otherwise affects the whole world? Historically, there's a link between the scale of the previous world wars and colonialism. Many countries fought on behalf of the empires of Great Britain and France because they were promised independence. Today, we don't have colonial alliances on this scale, and a war involving that many nations might be unrealistic. However, if we choose not to define a world war as a war that would affect the whole world, the prospect of a third becomes sickeningly plausible, mainly because of nuclear weapons. In the decades since the US's Trinity test was deemed successful in 1945 and the tragic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 9 countries have developed nuclear weapons. The Federation of American Scientists estimates that there are around 15,000 nuclear weapons in the world. The existence of these devastating warheads has led to widespread speculation and fear that a third world war is destined to also be a nuclear one, and also the downfall of mankind. It's often argued that this nightmarish prospect has deterred global conflict, but the proliferation of nuclear weapons also makes such a war much easier to initiate. All it would take would be one megalomaniac to order the first strike, and the counterstrikes and resultant fallout, environmental disasters, and economic crash could be the last nail in the coffin of our species. The biggest nuclear weapon in history was the Tsar Bomba, an unrealistically huge Soviet device designed almost entirely as a publicity stunt. Despite the impossibility of actually using it in war,
taking the light in our world. The veil between the living and the dead is breaking.
Korea, and due to its proximity to China and Taiwan, Okinawa still represents America's military stronghold in East Asia. The island hosts 38 US bases, which house a force of 35,000 soldiers. The growing tension between the US and the Soviet Union following the war led to an unprecedented global military buildup and to a strategy of exploitation of people's fears that in various forms has continued to this day.
You know how bad sunburn can feel. The atomic bomb flash could burn you worse than a terrible sunburn, especially where you're not covered.
In those years, America expanded into new territories, first and foremost South Korea, which still hosts 26 major US bases. But not all new bases were the consequence of war. Some were the result of simple power politics. Such is the case of Diego Garcia, a small island in the Indian Ocean, part of the British Overseas Territories, whose inhabitants got caught up in the global power struggle.
Nobody seems to know that Diego Garcia used to have a very considerable population that was all entirely bundled up and shipped out in order to, as the U.S. Navy put it, sanitize the place.
The U.S. wanted a base in the Indian Ocean at all cost because of the Cold War. Diego Garcia has a most wonderful, lagoon that would really be the ideal place for a base. So we were at the wrong place, at the wrong place at that time, because that place was the best place for the most sophisticated US and UK base outside of the US and the UK.
In 1971, due to an agreement between the UK and the US, the British made the island available to the Americans as a military base because of its geostrategic position, and deported its 2,000 inhabitants. Today, according to the Pentagon, Diego Garcia is one of the 13 major US military bases in the world and has played a crucial role in all post-9/11 conflicts. The Diego Garcia exiles today live scattered between Mauritius and the United Kingdom, where for years they have been fighting a legal battle to return to their island. In 2008, though, the House of Lords overruled all the cases previously won by the islanders, which upheld their right of return.
Oui, je pense que le gouvernement américain aussi est responsable. Si il aurait dit quand même, il savait très bien qu'il y avait des gens qui vivaient.
Life is struck.
I just wanted to play you that little clip right there, yeah, so you all could see that this here is no joke. You know, you can talk all this. You got power. When you ever go to somebody's land, snatch them up off the land, throw them in somebody else's country, set up a military post, and carry on about your business, that's power. The rest of it's nonsense, delusional, fairy tale, wishful thinking, magical dust smothered in lore and fantasy. Now, I'm not trying to do this to shock you. Oh my God, be all scared. It's just so that you're aware. So that when you start seeing these stories, you can start decoding the headlines, understanding what they are truly talking about and how it will ultimately affect you so that you, brother and sister, can make the correct adjustments in your life to prepare. Hold on, let's finish this.
As a publicity stunt. Despite the impossibility of actually using it in war, when the Tsar Bomba was detonated in 1961, the mushroom cloud it created was 35 miles high. It had a nuclear yield of 50 megatons or 50 million tons. For comparison, Fat Man, the device dropped on Nagasaki, had a yield of only 21 kilotons or 21,000 tons. But the question of how long a Third World War, if it were to be a nuclear war, would last is both simple and not so simple. From the moment the first bomb is dropped, life as we know it could be eradicated in a matter of hours, assuming that other nations responded in kind. In that case, civilization would be decimated, and the extreme nuclear fallout and radiation would spread across the globe, bringing about the ruination of humanity no matter how many countries tried to steer clear of the conflict. If we also categorize the long aftermath and recovery period as part of the war, well, it would take centuries or more for the world to bounce back from a nuclear apocalypse, and the chances of our survival are very small. Fortunately, bans on nuclear tests and treaties on non-proliferation suggest that nuclear weapons aren't something that most of the world actually wants to see used. There's always the possibility that the anti-war protesters will succeed and the planet's powerhouses will actually disarm. After all, the USSR and USA have both dabbled in nuclear disarmament in the past, while disarmament dominates peace talks between North and South Korea. This means that, for all the talk of nuclear apocalypse, there's at least a possibility that another world war might not resort to nuclear weapons. If this is the case, our prospective estimates for the conflict's duration begins to steadily extend. Without the potential for enormous weapons of mass destruction, any global war would become a huge quagmire. Historically, wars are only getting longer and longer. World War I was 4 years, World War II 6. But the Vietnam War, characterized by its brutal and unconventional guerrilla warfare, lasted for 2 decades, while the War on Terror, which has itself been dubbed World War III on occasion, has been steadily continuing since 2001. The Third World War is bound to be highly complex, with multiple contributing causes, and these complexities will serve to make it longer and more drawn out. More so if countries are relying on conventional fighting. Even with the involvement of an advanced military of a country like the United States, which has the largest and most powerful non-nuclear arsenal of weapons, a global conflict could still last for decades. Again, guerrillas in Vietnam were severely outmatched by US Marines, but ultimately forced the US to withdraw. But this doesn't mean that a war on this scale, even using conventional weaponry, doesn't have the potential to be just as deadly. It might just take more time to reach an equivalent death toll. A conventional war would also be exacerbated by the sheer volume of resources consumed by modern warfare, and the fact that during a worldwide conflict, it would be next to impossible to continue to manufacture supplies. Soldiers, weapons, food, and medicine would all begin to dwindle sickeningly quickly by regular ballistic attacks. With all of this in mind, the answer to the question how long would World War III last becomes horribly clear. For mere hours in the case of a nuclear war, and for decades in the case of a conventional one. Of course, this is still only speculative. We can only hope we never find out how long a third world war will last, because regardless of what kinds of weapons are used or how many countries are involved, widespread destruction and tragedy are the only real certainties. What do you think?
I think that was just a bunch of fear and propaganda. That's what I think. Now, we have to understand, the reason why they're letting this information out, the reason why certain countries are giving out pamphlets to citizens on this is how to prep, is because oftentimes the war that we're speaking of is not the war we talk about. It's so easy. Legendary, welcome to the show, peace and power. It's so easy to say the imperial or the monarch or the Illuminati or the global bankers. Well, we just can't just say the haters of humanity. I mean, irregardless of their sick ideology, whatever it may be, the core of it is that they hate other human beings. They want to see other human beings suffer. They want to see other human beings on the edge constantly. Incarceration, death, disease, famine, broken homes. That's what they want to see. And what I try to do on this program is illustrate, not in my words, but what is collectively known out there. I don't flash secret documents. I don't tell you, prophecies in such a way like, oh, on the 15th of, whatever. I've done it once and never again. But I do a great job of illustrating through examples, through history, and through an understanding of human nature. How these tragedies constantly start off, they build up, they engage, and then the conclusion. Whether it's slavery, whether it's the Holocaust, whether it's tribal warfare, or just simply genocide eugenics. It all goes back to hatred of humans. Let's continue.
Qu'il voit tout ce qui se passe dans le monde, je ne pense pas qu'il ignorait que nous étions en démocratie.
We had to suffer exile for defense purposes. And we paid that price, and that price is to be exiled from your homeland for the defense of the West.
To a substantial degree, in one form or another, socialism has spread the shadow of human regimentation over most of the nations of the earth. And the shadow is encroaching upon our own liberty.
Our business system has continued to provide a better life for our increasing population, in spite of destructive forces which have pounded against our foundation of freedoms with no avail. However, wars, or the threat of wars, interrupt the normal operations of our competitive business system.
I was certainly a Cold Warrior. I thought that the Soviet Union was a menace. I still do. I still believe that we had every right to try and defend ourselves against the power of the Soviet Union. I began to change. I got new information after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Above all, how fast our country moved, the United States, to find a replacement enemy.
Brother James, peace and power. Welcome to the show.
To keep the military-industrial complex functioning, to serve the vested interests in the Cold War system. I was appalled by this. I believe that we should have had, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that eliminated any basis for this global apparatus. There was no further reason for it. It was irrelevant. Instead, they moved at once to find another enemy: China, terrorism, drug lords, even instability, anything to keep it going.
We need an enemy. It's like we were a football team and we've been practicing to play a game. We learned certain plays, and now we don't have any opponent. How can we play this game anymore? And so they needed a new enemy. And the new enemy, well, for a while it was drugs. We had a war on drugs. But then came terrorism, and that was a very good substitute in the minds of our leaders.
Sometimes we're afraid of big things, and sometimes we're afraid of very little ones. But now there's something else about fear that I don't think you quite understand, Billy. What's that? Well, sometimes when you become afraid, there isn't anything that's really dangerous. Sometimes you think things are dangerous when they're not.
John Stockwell, former CIA agent, wrote, I think, a very prescient book called In Search of Enemies, in which he identified different eras in the U.S. society where the propaganda machine was geared up to identify a particular enemy of the moment in order that.
And with this all being said, and this is where it really gets kind of unpleasant, who has been the traditional enemy or the scapegoats in these United States? So when things really get bad, when the economic collapse comes, and it is truly coming, there could very well be a legitimate call for American nationalist, socialistic / eugenics. What basically World War II. It's just like Star Wars, how they keep warning us the Death Star, then the planet killer, and then the little ships that can kill planets now. They're trying to warn us collectively. You think it's over, and nope, these folks are still around. They're gathering their forces. They can call you a terrorist instead of a Jew. They could call you a slave instead of a prisoner of war. But the outcome is always the same. You have to die. Each and every time. And a lot of us look at these things that are coming our way and we try to reject them. Oh, it's not going to happen. True, blah, blah. It does not, once again, has to be validated by anybody. That's the beauty of it. Now, at this particular time in history, we are closer to nuclear annihilation than ever before. Simultaneously, we're facing the reality the petrodollar might not be the world's reserve currency any longer. Also, to complicate matters, we truly have a medical pharma complex or institution that is bent on getting around laws and regulations to ensure quality and stability of medications. So we could very well have a pandemic of sorts. We're going to have all this simultaneously happen, and to throw in the supernatural wild card, we'll have climate change occurring as well. That is a perfect recipe. In fact, it's really the only recipe to adequately destroy an entire species or society. And it's quite literally right in front of your face right now. And the only thing that can change that is the way you change how you think. But until that occurs, like I've always said, it's going to be a celebration.
That the U.S. public would support a military buildup or support a particular war. So I think today we have, for instance, Chavez in Venezuela, who really hasn't worked out too well as an enemy. So I think they really had to go to Ahmadinejad in Iran. Before that, it was Ortega in Nicaragua and Khomeini in Iran. There was Ho Chi Minh and Castro, for instance. So there always has to be a set of enemies that justify U.S. military buildup, particularly at a time when, for instance, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a danger that the U.S. public would no longer support continual war, continual military buildup.
What then becomes the rationale for continuing to have these military bases, for continuing to have the military alliances, for a military budget that equals the rest of the world combined.
What a worldwide network of bases means that you have at your fingertips, if you are the Emperor of the West, the means of perpetual war. There's always somebody we don't like and somebody who must be stopped. Perpetual war for perpetual peace as being the American dream. Once we were launched upon empire, we would never look back. And we would always find a pretext to attack an enemy.
Targeting is an intricate process. Many things are considered. We have advanced weapon systems with precision munitions, and we take care in matching the appropriate ordnance to produce the desired effect on the target.
The foundations for the New World Order were laid in the Middle East in 1991. Following the First Gulf War, the US established a permanent military presence in the Middle East, much like it had done 50 years earlier in Europe and East Asia. The true consequences of this policy would be seen only 10 years later. In 2001, Osama bin Laden cited the US military presence in his homeland, Saudi Arabia, as a reason for his hatred of the United States. In a curious twist of fate, though, the 9/11 attacks and America's military response paved the way for the birth of new military bases in Iraq and Central Asia, first and foremost in Afghanistan. The Pentagon's base structure.
You see, this is what's always been about. It's always been about you think you're making headways, but oh, look, here's an added benefit. Oops, look, now that this has happened, now we can implement these rules and regulations. The only way to win is quite literally, once again, goes back to Star Wars, turning Darth Vader from the dark into the light, as this is in Star Wars terms so that people can understand. Turning your enemy into your friend that will actually give their life to defeat the enemy of all of us. But then we just, go past all that and come to the reality of where we're at. We know that this isn't going to happen now, is it, folks? There isn't going to be a grand kumbaya, people hold hand in hand, go skipping off towards Washington, D.C., Moscow, the city of London, Vatican City, Dubai, and other capitals around the world, Berlin, demanding human unity, a one world government represented that all workers, whether you work in Brazil or you work in Finland, you get the same wage. Whether you're a flight attendant out of Hong Kong or a nurse in say Timbuktu, you make the same wage. That's where we're ultimately going. And it's going to be electronically done, so you don't have to worry about bank robbers and Jesse James and all that carrying on. I wish we could understand just how wicked the system of money has really been to our species. We only got a few more moments, and then we'll be wrapping this up.
Doesn't include the bases present in war zones or those considered politically sensitive, such as the ones in Israel. The actual number of US bases around the world is thus much larger than the 716 admitted by the US government.
Before engineers and contractors can begin construction on buildings here at the 380th, they first need a good foundation to build upon.
We are in charge of keeping the base clean, fence repair, concrete pads.
The heavy repair shop is currently working on pouring a concrete foundation for the base's new temporary gym. This job requires the whole unit to come together to get the job done.
The relationship between bases and war is a hand-in-glove relationship. Bases, most of the U.S. bases, I would say the majority, are the result of war. They are the booty or loot of war, in the sense that they were captured during wartime and never given back. When a very large, burly man comes and makes you an offer you can't refuse, you end up with the military base.
Now, that was a little mean-spirited, wasn't it? A burly man. You know, that more of that male, toxic masculinity talk there. But that's the reality. That's the way of the world. I'm sorry, I guess we could say. But unfortunately, that's the way of the world. Those who have power wield it. Those who don't are dominated by it. Now, those who don't have power, but really do have power, I dare say are worse off because of it. The fact that you could change your state of being, the fact that everything could be uplifted, but you elect not to do that, is a travesty. And I, for one, no longer want to be participating in the fantasy. I want something real. Hopefully next year will be the year of the hub. The year where instead of doing these political, I guess, ideological, motivational, whatever type videos, now I can actually be doing videos where I'm showing you the new construction being built. And we could talk to the political bullshit while I'm nailing up walls. It doesn't matter. I'm more than capable of doing that. Because this has truly been the year that your minds have been changed. I can almost 100% guarantee you that people have grown intellectually, obviously. You know, unless you've been underneath a rock somewhere, it's almost impossible not to achieve just that mere feat. But those of you who have listened to the show regularly and even done research on some of the topics that the show has been driven by, yeah, now you know. Now you all know. So with that being said, I got all kinds of phone calls and stuff. With that being said, I'm going to conclude TPIM SR Live for today. Please do your own research. Examine whether or not this ideal of or concept of a U.S. empire is even true or not. But more importantly, understand what is the implications, whether it's true or not. How does that affect you in your life, the way you operate? Sister Janice, peace and power. Welcome to the show. I ain't forgot about you. I'm finally starting to get a little better. I guess just like most of the country, I too had fallen sick. But what a fitting way to end this year. And it's really crazy. None of us, not one of us as of right now, will see the year 2020. But the majority of us really will. Please, please, please live your life with integrity, without hate, envy, or greed. As always, brothers and sisters, I ask you, please, let's try to be kinder to one another. There is peace and power. There is unity and victory. And there is dignity and respect. Liberation all. I'm out.